Amidst the luxury of a wedding, Claire's world falls apart. A face in the crowd sends her fleeing in a panic, seeking refuge on a dark terrace where she collides with an enigmatic stranger. He is Dr. Liam Sterling, a surgeon whose calm is as intimidating as his power. He doesn't ask what happened. He asks something far more dangerous. Who are you running from? Before she can answer, the danger finds her. In an instant, the stranger claims her as his own, orchestrating a daring escape that launches her into his world of secrets and luxury. He offers her protection, but his help comes with an unknown price. Why would such a powerful man risk himself for a complete stranger? What did he see in her eyes that made him act? Claire may have escaped one nightmare, but she has just stepped into a much larger enigma. And sometimes, the safest refuge is also the most dangerous trap. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, what city and country are you watching from right now? I love connecting with our amazing audience from around the world. Let's keep going. The music stopped. For a split second, the entire grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel held its breath as the string quartet faltered. Claire Matthews, who had been laughing at a joke with her friend Jessica, froze mid-laugh, a champagne flute halfway to her lips. Her smile dissolved. Every ounce of color drained from her face, leaving it a stark, porcelain white. Across the room, framed by the grand archway of the entrance, he had just walked in. Damien, her ex. He scanned the room, his eyes moving with the slow, deliberate confidence of a predator surveying his territory. "Oh my God," Jessica whispered, her hand flying to Claire's arm. "I didn't know he was invited." But Claire wasn't listening. The cheerful sounds of the wedding, the clinking glasses, the laughter, the music that had now nervously resumed, faded into a dull, distant roar. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. Her vision narrowed until he was the only thing she could see. His voice was suddenly in her head, a phantom whisper from a memory she couldn't escape. "You're so sensitive, Claire. It's exhausting. No one else would ever put up with you." The memory shifted, becoming a phantom touch. She could almost feel his hand gripping her arm, a little too tightly, his words echoing in her mind. "Don't be dramatic. I'm the best thing that ever happened to you, and you know it." The air in the ballroom grew thick, suffocating. She couldn't breathe. She had to get out. Now. "Claire, wait," Jessica pleaded. But Claire was already moving. She turned, her movements stiff, robotic, and fled. She didn't run, but she walked so fast it was almost a sprint, pushing through the glittering crowd, ignoring the confused looks from other guests. She just needed air. She needed to escape. She burst through a set of glass doors onto a secluded stone terrace, the cool night air a shocking, welcome slap against her heated skin. She stumbled to the balustrade, gripping the cold stone, her knuckles white. She leaned over, gasping for breath, her body trembling uncontrollably. She heard footsteps behind her. She flinched, her entire body coiling in on itself, a raw, instinctual terror seizing her. It was him. He had followed her. But the voice that spoke was not Damien's. It was calm, gentle, and laced with a quiet concern. "Are you okay? You looked like you were going to faint." She slowly turned. A man stood a few feet away, silhouetted against the light from the ballroom. He was tall, with a shock of dark red hair and eyes the most startling shade of blue she had ever seen. He held a glass of whiskey in one hand, his expression serious. Dr. Liam Sterling. She recognized him from a hospital fundraiser her school had participated in. A brilliant, charismatic surgeon. "I'm a doctor," he said, taking a hesitant step closer, his concern clearly genuine. "Can I help?" She just stared at him, the terror still swirling in her mind, her throat too tight to form words. He saw the raw, undiluted fear in her eyes, a fear that went far beyond a simple, dizzy spell. He seemed to understand in that instant that this was not a medical issue. It was something else. He closed the small distance between them, his voice dropping to a low, intimate whisper that was meant only for her. "Who are you running from?" The question, so direct, so perceptive, shattered the last of her composure. A single tear escaped and traced a hot path down her cheek. Her voice, when it finally came, was a broken, ragged whisper. "From a man who convinced me I was worthless." Back in the ballroom, Damien's eyes narrowed. He saw Claire's friend, Jessica, standing alone, a look of frantic worry on her face. He started toward her, his movement smooth and predatory. "Where did she go?" he asked, his voice a low, possessive purr that sent a shiver of fear down Jessica's spine. She just shook her head, but Damien's gaze had already found the open doors to the terrace. A dark, proprietary smile touched his lips as he began to walk toward them. On the terrace, Liam processed Claire's whispered confession. "From a man who convinced me I was worthless." The words, so full of pain and self-loathing, struck a chord deep inside him. He had seen that kind of psychological damage before, in his work, in his own complicated past. His professional concern as a doctor was instantly consumed by a fierce, protective instinct as a man. "You can't go back in there," he said, his voice firm, decisive. "Not tonight." "I have to," she whispered, her eyes still wide with fear. "My purse, my keys, my friend is still in there." "I'll have someone get them for you," he countered, "but you are not going back in there to face him." Before she could argue, the glass door creaked open. "Claire, what do you think you're doing?" Damien stood there, silhouetted against the bright lights of the ballroom. His voice was deceptively soft, the tone of a disappointed parent, but his eyes were hard, possessive chips of ice. He took a step onto the terrace, his gaze dismissing Liam as if he were a piece of furniture. Claire froze, her body going rigid, the panic threatening to swallow her whole again. But before she could even flinch, Liam moved. It was not a sudden or aggressive movement. It was smooth, deliberate, and utterly commanding. He stepped slightly in front of her, creating a subtle shield with his body. Then, he placed a hand on the small of her back, a firm, grounding pressure, and gently pulled her to his side. The gesture was a clear, undeniable, and public claim. He looked at Damien, his expression one of cool, polite dismissal. "I'm afraid she's with me tonight," Liam said, his voice calm, but with an underlying authority that was absolute. "If you'll excuse us." He didn't wait for a response. He didn't acknowledge Damien's sputtering, indignant protest. He simply kept his hand firmly on Claire's back and guided her toward a small stone staircase at the far end of the terrace that led down to a private service exit. "Let's get you out of here," he murmured, his voice for her ears only. Claire found herself moving, her feet following his lead as if in a dream. She had no idea where she was going. She had no idea who this man truly was. All she knew was that she was walking away from the monster she knew, and into the arms of a powerful, enigmatic stranger who had just, in front of everyone, claimed her as his. The interior of Liam's car was a world of silent, leather-scented luxury. It moved through the city streets with a quiet, powerful grace, leaving the noise and the chaos of the wedding far behind. Claire stared out the window at the blurred city lights, her mind a whirlwind of gratitude, fear, and profound confusion. She was sitting beside a complete stranger who had just orchestrated her escape with the cool efficiency of a military strategist. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, her voice a quiet whisper in the silent car. "Someplace safe," he replied, his voice calm and steady. He didn't look at her, his focus on the road. He took her to a stunning, modern house perched high in the hills overlooking the city. It was a fortress of glass and dark wood, surrounded by trees, a sanctuary of peace and security. He led her inside, the space vast, minimalist, and impeccably clean. "You can stay here for the night," he said, his tone professional. almost clinical. "No one will find you here." He didn't ask questions. He didn't pry. He simply brought her a cup of hot tea and a soft cashmere blanket, his movements efficient and surprisingly gentle. He treated her not like a conquest or a curiosity, but like a patient in shock, which, she supposed, was exactly what she was. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling as she took the warm cup. "I don't know how I can ever repay you." "There's nothing to repay," he said simply. Just then, her phone, which she had clutched in her hand the entire time, began to buzz violently on the table beside her. Then it buzzed again and again, a relentless, furious series of notifications. It was Damien. Her hand shook as she picked it up. The screen was a nightmare of his rage. Dozens of missed calls, a barrage of text messages, each one more venomous than the last. "Where are you? Who the hell was that? You think you can humiliate me like that and get away with it? You belong to me, Claire. I will find you." A cold, familiar dread washed over her. The man on the screen was the real Damien, the one she had lived in fear of for so long. Liam saw the color drain from her face, the way her hand trembled as she held the phone. He saw the raw terror return to her eyes. And in that moment, he made a decision. "This isn't just about one night, is it?" he said, his voice quiet, serious. "He's not going to stop." She could only shake her head, a single tear escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. "I have a guest house on the property," he said, his tone shifting, becoming firm, decisive. "It's separate from the main house, completely private. Stay there. For a few days, a week, as long as you need, until things calm down. I can guarantee your safety." The offer was shocking. To live on the property of this stranger? It was insane. But the alternative, returning to her small apartment, a place Damien knew, a place where she would be alone and vulnerable, was infinitely more terrifying. "Why?" she whispered, the question she had been wanting to ask all night. "Why are you doing this for me? You don't even know me." He looked at her, and his blue eyes, for the first time, held something other than professional concern or cool detachment. They held a flicker of a shared, painful understanding. "Because," he said softly, "no one deserves to feel the fear that I saw in your eyes tonight." Claire awoke to the sound of birdsong, a gentle, peaceful sound she hadn't heard in years. She was in a large, comfortable bed, the morning light filtering softly through the blinds. For a moment she was disoriented. Then the memory of the previous night came rushing back. The wedding, Damien, the terrifying escape, and the enigmatic doctor who had become her unlikely savior. She was in his guest house. It was less a house and more a stunning, self-contained cottage, decorated in warm, calming tones of cream and blue. It was a sanctuary, but it still felt like a beautiful cage. Liam, true to his word, kept a respectful distance. He didn't intrude. Later that morning, she found a basket outside her door containing fresh fruit, pastries, coffee, and a small handwritten note. "There are books in the library of the main house if you get bored. The Wi-Fi password is on the back. Liam." His handwriting was a sharp, decisive script, the handwriting of a surgeon. Driven by a need to understand the man who now held her safety in his hands, she spent the day doing what she did best: research. She learned that Dr. Liam Sterling was not just a successful plastic surgeon, he was a prodigy, one of the most respected reconstructive surgeons in the country. She found articles detailing his groundbreaking work with burn victims and children with congenital deformities. He wasn't just making the beautiful more beautiful. He was rebuilding lives. The image of the cold, calculating man from the wedding began to fracture, replaced by something far more complex. That night, sleep was impossible. The quiet of the estate was a stark contrast to the storm raging in her mind. She needed a distraction. Remembering his note, she slipped out of the guest house and made her way to the main house, which was dark and silent. The library was magnificent, a two-story room filled with the comforting scent of old books. She wandered the shelves, her fingers tracing the leather-bound spines. She was so engrossed that she didn't notice him until he spoke. "Can't sleep?" She jumped, spinning around. Liam stood in the doorway, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He was wearing simple gray sweatpants and a t-shirt, his usual armor of expensive suits gone. He looked younger, more approachable, and profoundly tired. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "I didn't mean to disturb you. Your note said—" "It's fine," he interrupted, his voice a low murmur. "The library is for anyone who needs it." He didn't leave. He walked to a large leather armchair in the corner and sat down, watching her. The silence between them was not awkward, but filled with a quiet, questioning energy. Her eyes drifted to a small, silver-framed photograph on the mantelpiece. It was a picture of Liam with a beautiful, laughing woman with vibrant blonde hair. They looked happy, carefree. "She's beautiful," Claire said softly, before she could stop herself. Liam's expression tightened, the brief warmth in his eyes vanishing, replaced by a familiar, guarded coldness. "That's Genevieve," he said, his voice flat. "My ex-wife." He took a slow sip of his drink. "Our divorce was complicated." The word complicated hung in the air, a door to a past he clearly kept locked and bolted. Claire saw it then, the flicker of pain, the shadow of a wound that had never properly healed. Her savior, the man who seemed so powerful and in control, had his own ghosts. He wasn't a prince from a fairy tale. He was a man with scars of his own. "Complicated how?" she asked, her voice gentle, a quiet invitation. The question lingered between them, a fragile bridge built across the chasm of their separate pains. The fragile peace of the estate was shattered 2 days later. Claire, feeling a desperate need for some semblance of normalcy, decided to return to her job at the elementary school where she taught first grade. She told herself Damien wouldn't dare show up there. It was a public place, a place of children and innocence. She was wrong. As she was leaving school that afternoon, her arms full of graded papers, she saw it. Damien's sleek, black sports car was parked across the street, a silent, menacing predator waiting for her. He was leaning against the hood, his arms crossed, a dark, possessive smile on his face. The papers slipped from her numb fingers, scattering across the sidewalk. The panic, the suffocating, breathless feeling she had felt at the wedding, came rushing back, a cold, sickening wave. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers trembling so hard she could barely dial. Liam answered on the first ring, his voice calm and professional. "Dr. Sterling." "He's here," she choked out, her voice a frantic, terrified whisper. "Outside my school. He found me." The line went silent for a fraction of a second. When Liam spoke again, his voice had changed. The calm doctor was gone. In his place was someone else, someone cold, controlled, and utterly dangerous. "Go back inside the school," he commanded, his voice a low, steady growl. "Lock the door. Do not leave. I'm on my way." The 20 minutes it took for him to arrive felt like an eternity. Claire watched from the window of the principal's office as Liam's car pulled up, blocking Damien's in. Liam got out of his car. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He walked over to Damien with a calm, deliberate stride that was far more intimidating than any display of aggression. Claire couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could see the confrontation. She saw Damien's arrogant posture, his dismissive gestures, and she saw Liam, perfectly still, his presence radiating a quiet, lethal authority. Then she saw Damien's face change. His smug smile faltered, replaced by a look of disbelief, then dawning, genuine fear. He took a step back, holding up his hands as if in surrender, before scrambling into his car and speeding away. Liam stood there for a moment, watching him go, before turning and walking into the school. He found her in the empty hallway, her body still trembling. "It's over," he said, his voice gentle again. "He won't be back." "What did you say to him?" she asked, her voice barely audible. He looked at her, his blue eyes serious. "I simply made it clear that any further contact with you would no longer be a personal matter but a legal one, and that in a legal battle I have more resources." But she knew it was more than that. She had seen the look on Damien's face. It wasn't the look of a man who had been threatened with lawyers. It was the look of a man who had just been shown a glimpse of a world far more dangerous than his own. He reached out, his hand hovering for a moment, before he gently placed it on her shoulder. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's go home." The word home hung in the air between them. He meant his home, of course, the safe house, the refuge. But as he guided her out of the school, his hand a warm, protective weight on her shoulder, she couldn't shake the feeling that he had meant something else entirely. And as they drove back to the estate, she looked at him, at this brilliant, complicated man who had just declared war on her behalf, and she realized that his quiet, possessive declaration from the wedding was becoming a terrifying, thrilling reality. He had said, "She's with me tonight." But his actions, his fierce, unwavering protection, were saying something else. They were saying, "She's mine." The confrontation at the school left Claire deeply shaken, but also filled with a new, unfamiliar emotion, anger. A cold, simmering rage at her own helplessness. "I hate this," she confessed to Liam that evening, pacing the vast, silent living room of the main house. "I hate feeling like a victim. I hate being afraid." Liam watched her, his expression thoughtful. He saw the fire in her eyes, the frustration of a strong woman who had been made to feel weak. He had an idea. "You can't control what he does," he said, his voice calm and steady. "But you can control how you feel. Strength isn't just physical, Claire. It's mental. It's about knowing you can fight back." The next day, he took her not to a park or a restaurant, but to a sleek private boxing gym tucked away in an industrial part of the city. It was his gym, a place of polished wood, black leather, and the clean, sharp scent of sweat and determination. "What are we doing here?" she asked, bewildered. "You're going to learn how to hit something," he replied, a small, rare smile on his lips as he handed her a pair of boxing gloves. He started with the basics, teaching her stance, footwork, how to throw a simple jab. He was a patient, focused instructor, his voice a low, encouraging murmur. At first, Claire was awkward, hesitant. Her punches were weak, her movements uncertain. "Don't be afraid of your own power," he told her, holding up a pair of focus mitts. "I want you to picture his face," he said, his voice dropping, becoming serious. "Picture every cruel word, every moment he made you feel small. And I want you to put all of that into your fist." Something inside her snapped. The memory of Damien's sneering face, the sting of his public humiliation, the terror she had felt outside the school, it all coalesced into a single point of white-hot fury. She let out a cry, a raw, primal sound, and threw a punch with all her might. The impact of her glove against the mitt was a sharp, satisfying crack that echoed in the quiet gym. A slow, impressed smile spread across Liam's face. "There you are," he whispered. The training session became a release, a catharsis. With every punch, she felt a piece of her fear, her helplessness, chipping away, replaced by a surge of power, of control. But as the session continued, the dynamic between them began to shift. The professional distance of doctor and patient, of protector and protected, dissolved, replaced by something far more intimate. He moved behind her to correct her form, his body close to hers. "Keep your guard up," he murmured, his hands on her arms, guiding them into the correct position. His breath was warm on her neck, sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the workout. He placed his hands on her waist to adjust her stance, his touch firm, electric. "Twist from your core," he instructed, his voice a low rumble against her back. They were so close she could feel the heat of his body, could smell the clean masculine scent of his skin mingling with the leather of the gloves. The air grew thick, charged with a new, dangerous energy. The gym, the punching bags, the entire world outside of their small, shared space seemed to fade away. He moved in front of her again, holding up the mitts. "Again," he commanded, his voice a little rougher now. She looked up at him, her chest heaving, her face flushed. Her eyes met his, and the breath caught in her throat. The look in his blue eyes was no longer that of a teacher. It was the raw, unguarded look of a man who wanted her. The world seemed to slow down. The sound of their own breathing was deafening in the silent gym. He slowly lowered the mitts, his gaze never leaving hers. He took a half step closer. This was it. The moment from the terrace, the moment from the piazza in Florence. The inevitable, terrifying, beautiful moment. He was going to kiss her. And then he stopped. He froze, a war raging in his eyes between the desire that was so clearly written on his face and the iron-clad control he had spent years perfecting. "I think," he said, his voice a hoarse, strained whisper. "That's enough for today." He took a stumbling step back, away from her, breaking the spell. He turned and began to busy himself with the equipment, his back rigid, his movements jerky. He had pulled back again. But this time, it was different. This time, she had seen it, felt it, with an undeniable certainty. He wanted her just as much as she was beginning to realize she wanted him. And his denial was no longer a rejection. It was a confession. The almost kiss in the gym left a new, agonizing tension in its wake. Liam retreated again, becoming more distant, more professional than ever. He was polite, but the wall was back up, higher and colder than before. He was clearly terrified of the emotion that had flared between them, and he was determined to keep it from ever happening again. Claire, however, was no longer the frightened, timid woman from the wedding. The training, the confrontation with Damien, Liam's own complicated behavior, it had all ignited a new fire in her. She was no longer just a victim in need of protection. She was a woman in search of the truth. His ex-wife, Genevieve. The complicated divorce. It was the key, she knew, to understanding the man who was her protector and her tormentor. Armed with a new, fierce determination, she began to dig. She didn't use a private investigator. She used her own intelligence, her skills as a researcher. She started with the public records of their divorce, which were, as expected, sealed. But she found a name. Genevieve's maiden name, d'Amboise. It was an old, powerful name, associated with one of the city's oldest and most respected financial dynasties. Her search then led her to old society articles, charity event photos, and business journals from the time of their marriage. The articles painted a picture of a fairy tale couple, the brilliant, handsome surgeon and the beautiful, sophisticated heiress. But as Claire looked closer, she noticed a pattern. In every photo, Genevieve was radiant, the center of attention. Liam, by her side, always looked slightly out of place, his smile a little too tight, his eyes guarded. Then she found it. An obscure article from a financial blog, dated just a few months after their divorce was finalized. The headline was innocuous. D'Amboise Industries announces major restructuring, avoids bankruptcy. Curiosity piqued, she read on. The article detailed how the d'Amboise family's massive corporation, which had been on the brink of a catastrophic collapse due to a series of bad investments, had been saved at the 11th hour by a massive, anonymous infusion of capital. A mysterious holding company with no public face had bought up the company's toxic debt, restructured its finances, and quietly saved it from ruin. The name of the holding company was Sterling Phoenix Group. Sterling. The word leaped off the page. Claire's heart began to pound. It couldn't be. She spent the next hour cross-referencing corporate registration documents, a complex, tangled web of shell companies and numbered accounts. But the trail, though cleverly hidden, was undeniable. The money, The hundreds of millions of dollars that had saved his ex-wife's family from utter disgrace and financial ruin had come from Liam. She leaned back in her chair, her mind reeling. The story the tabloids had hinted at, of a cold, work-obsessed husband who had neglected his wife, was a lie. This was not the act of a cynical, bitter ex-husband. This was the act of a man who had quietly, secretly, and at immense personal cost, saved the woman who had left him. She finally understood. His aversion to love, his fear of emotional connection, it wasn't because he was cold or unfeeling. It was because he felt too much. His love was so fierce, so protective, that he had sacrificed a fortune for a woman who was no longer even his. He had been so deeply wounded by the loss of that love that he had built a fortress around his heart, determined to never let anyone get close enough to make him that vulnerable again. She looked at the closed door of the main house, where he was likely working, oblivious to her discovery. The man she had thought was a cynical prince was, in fact, a silent, wounded king. And she, the woman he was trying so desperately to keep at arm's length, was the one person who now knew the truth of his noble, broken heart. The knowledge of Liam's secret sacrifice changed everything. Claire no longer saw his distance as a rejection, but as a defense mechanism. His walls were not there to keep her out. They were there to protect his own wounded heart. And she knew, with a sudden, fierce certainty, that she had to be the one to tear them down. That evening, she did something bold. She walked to the main house and found him in the kitchen, staring blankly into the open refrigerator. "I'll cook dinner tonight," she announced, her voice leaving no room for argument. He looked up, surprised. "You don't have to do that. The chef has the night off," she interrupted, taking a bag of groceries she had asked one of his staff to buy for her. "Tonight, you're my guest." The dinner was a simple, home-cooked meal, a world away from the catered perfection they were used to. They ate not in the grand, formal dining room, but at the small, intimate table in the kitchen. The silence between them was not tense, but filled with a quiet, simmering anticipation. She let him lead the conversation, talking about his day at the hospital, a particularly difficult surgery he had performed. She listened, asked questions, and waited for the right moment. It came over a shared bottle of wine. "I know what you did, Liam," she said softly, her voice clear and steady in the quiet kitchen. He went completely still, his wine glass halfway to his lips. "I don't know what you're talking about." "For Genevieve," she continued, her gaze unwavering. "For her family's company. I know you were the one who saved them." He stared at her, his mask of cool control completely gone, replaced by a look of raw, stunned shock. He looked like a man whose deepest, most guarded secret had just been laid bare. "How?" he whispered, his voice a hoarse rasp. "I'm a good researcher," she replied simply. "But that's not the point. The point is why? Why would you save the woman who left you, who broke your heart? And why would you do it in secret?" He looked away, staring at the wine in his glass as if it held the answers to the universe. "Because it was never about the money," he confessed, his voice barely audible. "And it wasn't for her. It was for me." He finally looked at her, his eyes filled with a pain so deep it was bottomless. "When she left, she said I was cold, that I was incapable of real love, that all I cared about was my work. And for a long time, I believed her. I built my life around that belief. I accepted that I was the villain in our story." He took a shaky breath. "Saving her family's company. It was my way of proving her wrong, if only to myself. It was my way of showing that I could love someone, that I could protect them, even if they didn't want me to. It was my penance for failing her." His confession was a gut punch, a revelation of a man so noble and so broken that it made her heart ache. "You didn't fail her, Liam," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She reached across the table and took his hand. "She failed you." He looked down at their joined hands, then up at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. The last of his walls, the fortress he had built around his heart for years, crumbled into dust. "I'm so afraid of this, Claire," he admitted, his voice breaking, "of what I feel for you. I don't know how to do this without wanting to control it, to protect it, to lock it away so it can't be hurt." "Then don't," she said, her grip on his hand tightening. "Don't control it, just feel it with me." He stood up, pulling her to her feet. He framed her face with his hands, his gaze intense, searching. "I don't know how," he whispered. "I'll teach you," she replied. And then she kissed him. It was not the desperate, hungry kiss from the gym. It was a kiss of profound understanding, of acceptance, of healing. It was a kiss that said, "I see your scars, and I am not afraid." He kissed her back, a slow, deep, and absolute surrender. It was the kiss of a man who had been lost in the dark for years, and had just finally been shown the way home. The morning after their kiss was like waking up in a new world. The heavy, unspoken tension that had filled the estate for weeks was gone, replaced by a light, joyful intimacy. They were no longer protector and protected, or doctor and patient. They were Liam and Claire, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. The next few weeks were a blissful, stolen dream. They spent a weekend in a secluded cabin by a lake that Liam owned, away from the city, away from their pasts. They hiked, they cooked, they talked for hours, sharing stories and secrets with the easy comfort of people who had known each other for a lifetime. He made her laugh, a deep, genuine belly laugh she hadn't felt in years. She made him relax, coaxing the serious, driven surgeon to simply be still, to enjoy the moment. For the first time in a very long time, they were both simply happy. But the world, and Damien, had not forgotten them. Their fragile peace was shattered by a single, official-looking envelope that arrived by courier. It was addressed to Liam. He opened it in the kitchen, his expression slowly hardening as he read the contents. The warmth and relaxation of their weekend vanished, replaced by the cold, hard mask of the man she had first met. "What is it?" Claire asked, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. "It's from the State Medical Board," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. He handed her the letter. It was a formal notice. A complaint had been filed against him by Damien. The allegations were vicious and cleverly twisted. Damien claimed that Liam, acting as Claire's doctor on the night of the wedding, had taken advantage of her emotionally vulnerable state. He accused Liam of professional misconduct, of using his position of power to coerce a fragile woman into a dependent relationship. He painted Liam as a predator and Claire as his unstable, helpless victim. The letter concluded by stating that a formal ethics hearing had been scheduled. Liam's medical license, his career, his entire reputation, was now on the line. "He's not trying to get you back anymore," Liam said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "He's trying to destroy me." Claire stared at the letter, her hands trembling. Damien had found Liam's one true vulnerability, his unwavering sense of honor and his professional integrity. He had turned Liam's act of kindness, his protection, into a weapon to be used against him. The war had just escalated from a personal vendetta to a professional execution, and Claire was the unwitting weapon at the center of it all. The days leading up to the ethics hearing were a tense, strategic whirlwind. Liam's lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah, was grim. "This is a serious accusation, Liam," she said, her office overlooking the city. "Damien's complaint is cleverly worded. He's not accusing you of a crime. He's accusing you of an ethical breach. It's a he said, she said situation, and the board is notoriously conservative. They will see a powerful, wealthy doctor and a vulnerable young woman, and they will draw their own conclusions." "But it's all lies," Claire insisted, her voice tight with anger. "It doesn't matter," Sarah replied, her gaze softening as she looked at Claire. "What matters is perception, and right now, Damien controls the perception. Liam wanted to protect Claire from the hearing. He wanted to face the board alone, to shield her from the humiliation of having her past, her pain, dissected in a sterile conference room. "No," Claire said, her voice firm, unwavering. "I will not hide. He is using my story as a weapon against you. I will be the one to take that weapon away from him." The day of the hearing, the atmosphere in the medical board's conference room was as cold and sterile as an operating theater. A panel of a dozen stern-faced doctors and administrators sat like judges, their expressions unreadable. Damien was there, dressed in a conservative suit, the very picture of a concerned, wronged ex-boyfriend. He delivered his testimony with a masterful performance of feigned sincerity and regret. He spoke of Claire's fragility, her emotional instability after their breakup. He painted a picture of Liam as a predatory opportunist who had swooped in at her moment of weakness. "I was just worried about her," Damien concluded, his voice thick with false emotion. "She was not in her right mind. A doctor should have known better." It was a brilliant, poisonous narrative. Then it was Claire's turn. Liam squeezed her hand under the table, a silent message of support. She walked to the witness chair, her head held high. She was not the trembling, frightened girl from the wedding. She was a woman who had found her strength. She didn't look at Damien. She looked directly at the board members. "My name is Claire Matthews," she began, her voice clear and steady, "and I am not a victim." For the next hour, she told them her story. The real story. She spoke of Damien's psychological abuse, the way he had systematically dismantled her self-worth. She spoke of the terror she had felt at the wedding, the feeling of being trapped, of suffocating. And then she spoke of Liam. She spoke of his unexpected kindness, of his respectful distance, of the way he had given her a safe place to heal. She spoke of him teaching her how to fight back, not just physically, but mentally. "Dr. Sterling did not take advantage of a vulnerable woman," she said, her voice ringing with a powerful, undeniable truth. "He gave a strong woman the space she needed to find her own strength again. He did not coerce me. He empowered me." She finished, her words hanging in the silent, stunned room. Her testimony had been a masterpiece of quiet dignity and unwavering strength. But Damien's lawyer had one last, venomous card to play. He stood up, a smug look on his face. "Miss Matthews, your story is very moving," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But it is just that, a story. You claim this was not a transactional relationship. Then how do you explain this?" He placed a document on the projector. It was a bank statement. It showed a single, massive transfer of funds from one of Liam's holding companies to a new trust account set up in Claire's name. The amount was staggering. "It appears, gentlemen," the lawyer said, turning to the board, "that Dr. Sterling's empowerment came with a very hefty price tag. This wasn't protection. It was a payment. He bought her. And that, by any definition, is a gross violation of medical ethics." The image of the bank statement hung in the air, a stunning, damning piece of evidence. A wave of murmurs swept through the boardroom. Damien's lawyer had played his trump card perfectly. The transfer looked exactly like what he claimed it was. A payment. A sordid transactional secret that undermined everything Claire had just said. Claire stared at the screen, her heart sinking. She had forgotten about the money. Liam had insisted on setting up the trust fund for her on her first day at the guest house. "It's for your independence," he had said, "so you never have to feel trapped again." Now, that very act of generosity was being twisted into a weapon to destroy him. Liam's lawyer, Sarah, stood up to object, to explain the context of the fund, but the damage was done. The board members were looking at Liam with new, suspicious eyes. The perception in the room had shifted, just as Damien had planned. Liam remained perfectly still. He looked at the bank statement on the screen. He looked at Damien's smug, triumphant face. And then he looked at Claire, and he saw the flicker of despair in her eyes. He saw her pain, her humiliation, as her private struggles were once again being used as a weapon in a battle between powerful men, and in that moment, he made a choice. He could fight this. He could let his lawyers argue, explain the context, and drag Claire through a long, ugly battle of character assassination. He could probably even win. But it would come at a cost. Her cost. It would mean dissecting her past, her fears, her vulnerability, all for the sake of his career. He would not do that to her. He would not let her be collateral damage in his war. He stood up slowly, his movement commanding the attention of the entire room. "He's right," Liam said, his voice calm, clear, and utterly shocking. Claire's head snapped toward him, her eyes wide with disbelief. Sarah, his lawyer, looked at him as if he had lost his mind. "Yes, I transferred that money," Liam continued, his gaze fixed on the chairman of the board. "And yes," he said, his voice turning hard, "my relationship with Miss Matthews became personal. It crossed a line from professional concern to a deep personal attachment." He let the admission hang in the air, a stunning confession of guilt. "The rules of this board, the ethics of our profession, are in place to prevent even the appearance of impropriety," he said, his voice ringing with a strange, new authority. "And while my intentions were honorable, the appearance has been compromised." He looked around the room, at the stunned faces of his colleagues, the men and women he had worked with for years. "Therefore," he announced, his voice steady and resolute, "to remove any question of impropriety, to protect the integrity of this hospital, and to shield Miss Matthews from any further public scrutiny, I hereby tender my resignation from my position as Chief of Reconstructive Surgery, effective immediately." The room erupted in a cacophony of gasps and shocked whispers. He had just sacrificed everything: his career, his position, the department his family had funded for generations. He'd thrown it all away. He didn't look at the board. He didn't look at Damien. He looked only at Claire. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent message that said, "You are more important." He then turned and walked out of the hearing room, leaving behind his career, his reputation, and a room full of stunned, silent people. He had chosen her, completely and unconditionally, above all else. Liam's resignation sent shockwaves through the city's medical and social circles. It was the lead story on every news site. Star surgeon resigns amid ethics scandal. Damien was ecstatic, celebrating his victory, believing he had successfully completely destroyed his rival. Claire, however, was devastated. She found Liam back at his house, not angry or defeated, but strangely, profoundly calm. "You can't do this," she said, her voice choked with tears. "You can't throw away your entire life's work, for me." "It's just a job, Claire," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. He took her hands in his. "My work is important, but it's not my life. You are my life. I would burn it all down to keep you safe. I meant what I said. I protect what's mine." His words, his absolute, unwavering devotion, only strengthened her resolve. She would not let him make this sacrifice. She would not let Damien win. She called the one person she knew she could trust, her friend Jessica, the bride from the wedding. She told her everything. "He's a monster," Jessica said, her voice tight with fury when she heard the full story of Damien's abuse. "And we're going to prove it." Together, they began to dig. They were no longer just looking for rumors. They were looking for victims. They spent days making discreet calls, sending private messages, searching for anyone else who had been caught in Damien's web. And then they found her. A woman named Sarah, a graphic designer who had dated Damien 2 years before Claire. Her story was a chilling, almost identical echo of Claire's. The intense charm, the slow erosion of her confidence, the gaslighting, the isolation. And when she had tried to leave, the harassment. But Sarah had been smart. She had saved everything. She sent Claire a file containing screenshots of dozens of text messages, saved voicemails, and threatening emails from Damien. It was a complete, undeniable record of his psychological abuse, a pattern of coercive control that was terrifying in its consistency. "This is it," Claire whispered, looking at the mountain of evidence. "This is the proof." Armed with this new, damning information, Claire knew she couldn't just go back to the medical board. This was bigger than Liam's career now. This was about justice. This was about stopping a predator. She made a call. The next day, she walked into a sleek downtown law office. At the head of a large conference table sat a woman with intelligent eyes and a reputation for being one of the most formidable litigators in the city. It was Genevieve, Liam's ex-wife. Claire laid the file of evidence on the table between them. "I need your help," Claire said, her voice steady and firm. "I'm not here to save Liam's career. He's too proud to accept that. I'm here because I want to destroy the man who does this to women. And I heard you're the best." Genevieve looked at the evidence, then at the fierce, determined woman sitting across from her. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. "I may not have loved Liam the right way," she said, her voice a blade of steel. "But I know he is a good man. And I absolutely despise men like Damien." She looked at Claire, a new, unexpected alliance forming between the ex-wife and the new love. "Let's get to work," Genevieve said. The partnership between Claire and Genevieve was a force of nature. Genevieve, with her sharp legal mind and her deep, intimate knowledge of the city's power structures, was the perfect general for their war. Claire, with her first-hand experience and the damning evidence from Sarah, was the undeniable, powerful truth at the heart of their case. They didn't just file a complaint. They launched a full-scale, multi-pronged legal assault. First, Genevieve, representing both Claire and Sarah, filed for a temporary restraining order against Damien, citing a pattern of harassment and stalking. The evidence, the texts, the emails, the voicemails, was so overwhelming that the judge granted it immediately, a shocking public blow to Damien's reputation. Next, they filed a civil lawsuit for intentional infliction of emotional distress. The suit was a masterpiece, detailing Damien's systematic psychological abuse with cold, clinical precision. But Genevieve's masterstroke was her use of the media. She didn't leak the story to a gossip columnist. She gave an exclusive, on-the-record interview to a respected Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist known for her in-depth investigative pieces on powerful men who abuse their positions. The story that came out was not a piece of salacious gossip. It was a bombshell. A meticulously researched, fact-checked exposé on Damien's predatory behavior, featuring the brave, on-the-record testimony of two of his victims. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Damien. His firm, facing a PR nightmare, suspended him indefinitely. His wealthy fiancée, horrified by the revelations, publicly called off their engagement. His social circle, once so quick to laugh at his cruel jokes, now shunned him completely. He was a pariah. The story also had another unintended consequence. It completely recontextualized the medical board's hearing against Liam. The board, now seeing the true nature of the man who had filed the complaint, quietly convened another private meeting. They reviewed the new evidence. They saw Damien not as a concerned ex-boyfriend, but as a malicious, manipulative predator who had used their ethical board as a tool for his personal vendetta. The chairman of the board called Liam personally. "Dr. Sterling," the chairman said, his voice full of a deep, formal apology. "The board has unanimously voted to dismiss all complaints against you. The evidence of Mr. Damien's malicious intent is undeniable. We were misled." He paused. "Furthermore, the board would like to formally and humbly ask you to reconsider your resignation. Your position as chief of surgery is waiting for you, should you choose to accept it." The victory was absolute. Damien was ruined. Liam's name was cleared. His career was restored. Liam hung up the phone, a sense of profound, quiet relief washing over him. He found Claire in the library, looking out the window, a soft smile on her face. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You did it," he whispered, his voice full of awe and admiration. "You saved me." She turned in his arms to face him. "No," she said, her eyes shining. "We saved each other." The offer from the hospital board was a complete vindication, a restoration of his honor and his career. Everyone expected Liam to accept it immediately, to step back into his role as the celebrated chief of surgery. But the man who had walked out of that hearing room was not the same man who had walked in. The crisis, his sacrifice, and Claire's fierce, unwavering loyalty had changed him in a fundamental way. He called the chairman of the board the next day. "Thank you for the generous offer," Liam said, his voice calm and resolute. "But I must respectfully decline." When he told Claire his decision, she was stunned. "But why? You've won. Your name is cleared. It's your family's legacy." "It was my family's legacy," he corrected gently. "It's time for me to build my own. With you." The next day, he took her to a part of the city she had never seen, a working-class neighborhood with a quiet, determined sense of community. He stopped in front of a large, slightly run-down brick building that had once been a community clinic but had been shuttered for years. "This is my future," he said, a new, passionate light in his eyes. He explained his dream, a dream he had secretly nurtured for years. He wanted to use his fortune not just to fund galas, but to create something real. He had sold his majority shares in the private hospital, a move that had shocked the financial world, and had used the capital to purchase this building. "I'm going to reopen it," he said, his voice full of a purpose she had never heard before. "A state-of-the-art non-profit clinic, the Sterling Matthews Clinic. It will provide the best reconstructive and medical care in the country, for free, to those who can't afford it. No insurance, no billing, just healing." He then turned to her, his expression serious. "But a clinic can only heal the body." He led her to the second floor of the building. It was a vast, open space, filled with dust and old equipment, but with huge windows that flooded the room with natural light. "This," he said, his voice a low, hopeful murmur, "is for you. It will be an art studio, a community center, a safe place for children and adults to come and heal their spirits, to find their voice, just like you helped me find mine. And you will run it, Claire. You will be its heart." He wasn't offering her a job. He wasn't offering her a title. He was offering her a shared purpose, a shared dream, a life built together on a foundation of healing and hope. Tears streamed down her face as she looked around the dusty, promising space. It was in that room, surrounded by the ghosts of what had been and the promise of what could be, that he got down on one knee. He didn't have a ring. He didn't have a speech prepared. He just looked up at her, his heart in his eyes. "I don't have a hospital empire to offer you anymore, Claire Matthews," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. "I just have my heart, my protection, and a life spent building something that matters. With you." He took her hand. "Will you marry me?" 1 year later, the Sterling Matthews Clinic and Community Center was a vibrant, thriving hub of hope in the heart of the city. The once derelict brick building was now a state-of-the-art medical facility on the ground floor, and a beautiful, light-filled art studio and community space on the second. Their wedding was not held in a grand ballroom or a stuffy church. It took place in the very garden they had built behind the community center, a lush, green space filled with flowers planted by the neighborhood children Claire now taught. The guests were not the city's wealthy elite. They were the doctors and nurses from the clinic, the families whose lives had been changed by their work, the children who now had a safe place to create and dream. Jessica was there, her smile genuine and proud. Genevieve was there, a respected friend and a powerful member of the foundation's board. Sarah, the woman they had found, was there, her face full of a peace she had never thought she would find. Claire wore a simple, elegant dress, her face radiant with a happiness that was deep and real. Liam stood waiting for her, not in an expensive tuxedo, but in a simple, well-tailored suit, his eyes full of a love and admiration that was boundless. Their vows were whispered to each other, Promises not of wealth or status, but of partnership, of shared purpose, of a lifetime spent healing, both themselves and the world around them. During the simple, joyful reception, as the sun began to set, Liam took the microphone. He didn't give a long speech. He just looked at his wife, his partner, the woman who had saved him from a life of empty success. "On the day I met you," he said, his voice clear and strong, resonating through the quiet garden, "I asked you who you were running from. I spent the next year making sure you would never have to run from anything again." He paused, his voice thick with emotion as he looked at Claire. "But the truth is, you were the one who was saving me. You were saving me from a life without you." He raised his glass. "To my wife," he said, his voice full of a love that filled the entire garden. "My partner. My refuge." They kissed, and it was not a kiss of passion or of desperation. It was a kiss of profound, quiet peace. There were no more ghosts, no more fear. Only the promise of a future they had built together, not as a prince saving a damsel, but as two survivors who had found in each other their final and truest home.